All right, so folks, welcome to this evening's AWS Pug, the Portsmouth User Group. This evening, we are very excited to have somebody that Tim will intro in as soon as I've gotten through all of the regular stuff. Get in on the conversation. If you go over to awspug.org, you'll see our Twitter handle, and you'll see the Slack channel. From the website, you can sign up for the Slack channel. And please follow us online. Big shout out and thank you to all of our sponsors, of course, AWS, Manning, Riley, A-Cloud Guru, Seaglass, Liberty, and Green Pages. They've all been wonderful sponsors of the in-person meetups and also the online show, I guess we call it that. So with that, Mr. Durgan.
Thanks, Chris. So Tim Durgan here. I want to introduce Josh Hurley with AWS. Josh and I go back a long time, I think, Josh. We met in a user group that I used to run in Maine called Maine Bytes, which was a .NET focused user group. And Josh was a regular attender and probably asked some of the more complex and difficult questions of the speakers, which is always fun when you have a user group where you have at least one person trying to stump the expert. That's always enjoyable for the user group leader. So. And Josh, you joined AWS 2 years ago or something to that effect, not too long. And I was thinking when we were looking around for speakers that Josh would be a great addition to the group, since I doubt we've talked about .NET on the platform. Obviously, a lot of people think Azure when they think .NET, but I think Josh will point out to you tonight that the support in AWS is quite impressive indeed. So Josh, take it away, my friend.
All right. And I did want to just go around, if we could just have everyone introduce themselves. I can, since it's a small group, I can definitely tailor it based on interest. And just adding on what Tim said, it was great. I think I was first started attending when you were at Unum, right, at the for the Maine Bytes. And it was, we knew the Pluralsight guys before they were even Pluralsight. When they were where they were like, oh, we're thinking about doing something in the cloud, but we're doing in-person is really the thing to do right now. But we'll play around with the cloud thing. So it was cool to see them take off, local company, and spoke right at our user group. Absolutely.
Pluralsight used to be local.
Yeah, Fritz is still local. He's down in Wells.
Yeah, Pluralsight was Aaron Sconard and Fritz Onion and. I'm trying to remember the third one, the security guy, but yeah, Fritz Onion is still a main guy.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. So as Tim mentioned, started AWS a couple of years ago. They brought me in as a .NET guy, and initially when I started, I was like, well, I really don't have a ton of experience with AWS. As Tim said, the natural path if you're a .NET person was to go to Azure, and but I'd used AWS for a number of services for like S3 and that kind of thing for backing up systems and things like that. But I hadn't really explored much with .NET and so forth. And when they started talking about position and they started going through what they were thinking of offering and how they were expanding, I was like, wow, this is actually a really cool opportunity to be involved. And in my current position as a .NET developer advocate has been great. I've been able to work with about 36 service teams across AWS. Last half of last year, worked with those teams to actually implement and improve our offering so that when .NET 5 came out, we had a really strong offering for .NET 5, which I'll get into in the presentation. So it's been really an exciting journey. It's only technically in the calendar 2 years and 4 months, but it seems like it's been longer because it's just been action-packed. As you can imagine with AWS, things always change, and it's like reinvent, even though you might get the heads up on some things, and Craig, who's also on the call, can attest to this. We're always surprised. I mean, it's even internally, it's like, the teams work so fast and are independent a lot of the time that you're like, oh, wow, that's an exciting announcement. Sometimes it's a customer that says, hey, did you hear what was just announced? I'm like, oh, no, just found out myself. So it's an exciting journey. So, the long-winded way of saying, if there is something you're interested in knowing that I'm not covering, I might not necessarily know the answer, but I will be able to find the person that can get an answer for you. So I'm more than happy to do that. And I'm always interested in learning something new. So if there's a subject, even if it's not .NET related, absolutely hit me up and I can help you out. All right. So if we just want to go around the horn there, and I can, if you just give me your background a little bit, I can adapt. If you are familiar with AWS, let me know. I have some familiar with .NET, that kind of thing. That'd be great.
I think you're gonna have to select somebody because everybody's screen's different, so we don't know.
Well, we know Tim, but you want to start us off, Tim?
Yeah, sure. Extensive .NET experience, but I haven't touched it on AWS yet, Josh. So I'm looking forward to tonight's session.
Okay. And Chris Williams?
Yes, I'm a nascent developer. Well, all of my experience is on the other sides. I'm interested to learn what the capabilities are, but I do not have any .NET experience.
Right. And the other Chris?
The other Chris, that's what I'm known as. So a lot of AWS experience, passionate serverless developer, mostly Node.js and Python. Not a lot of .NET exposure, but definitely interested to hear some of the use cases that .NET might make more sense for running out in AWS. And that's all I got.
Awesome. And Dave?
Yep. Quite a bit of AWS experience when I was at Liberty, but now I'm kind of leaning towards AWS AI services, and I'm interested in .NET as many of the technical analysis applications are Windows-based with .NET APIs and things like that. So that would be my interest.
Great. And I think Steve, unless Steve's joined, I think we'll skip over Steve. Okay. And Craig, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Craig Bossy. Excuse me. I'm a co-organizer with Josh of the .NET user group in Portland, and a co-organizer of the AWS user group in the Portland area too. So I don't know anything about AWS or .NET. So Josh, hopefully you can tell us something awesome today.
Craig's being modest. He's a solution architect out of Boston.
And I work with Boston. Josh. There we go.
And he's actually, which is awesome, been leading .NET immersion days for us with local customers, right, Craig?
Yep, .NET and just Microsoft immersion days.
So if Liberty's interested, Craig would be more than happy. If I don't want to speak for you, to come and do an immersion day, right?
Always happy.
Yeah. Sean?
Hey, yeah, I have like pretty good AWS experience, and a bit of, like, I would say like more than half of my background is doing .NET development, but like originally it was not .NET Core, and then I kind of ran away, and like now I have a little bit of opportunity to work with .NET Core, but not really as much as I like to. But yeah,
cool.
I don't have anything in mind, so I'll just watch and stuff.
Cool. And Kengo, did I say that right?
Yeah, I'm more of a .NET developer, and kind of forced into this new project with AWS. Now trying to better understand with Node.js. So it's really different world I'm living in.
Absolutely. All right, and I think that was the same Dave. My screen just switched over, right? Or is that different Dave? But no, my screen Dave bounced between. Yep, I think that's.
I believe there's only one of us on this evening.
Okay. Yep.
So thank you.
It had switched back and forth on my screen. I was like, okay. All right, cool. All right, I can get it started here, and let me do the screen share here. Host disabled participant sharing. I just need the screen share ability there.
I'm so bad at this. One moment, please.
They want you to do the shadow puppets. And...
There you go. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Chris, are you an only child?
I am. I'm sorry.
You gave that away.
Are you able to share now, Josh?
Yep. Let me just grab the right screen. Hold on just a sec.
Cool.
I'm used to working in Chime at it is.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. I mean,
that's fired. Wow.
All right. Yeah, let me get this out of the way. All right. Great.
You're going to be stripped of your community builder for that, Chris.
Yeah, right. Just scrub that. I heard we have a post-production process. Just scrub it. We're good.
All right, I'll res it out.
All right, you guys can see the screen?
Nope.
No? Ooh.
So select the screen and then hit share.
Oh, share. Yeah, it would be helpful if I hit the share button.
There you go.
Beauty.
Boom.
All right. And it's showing you the right screen here, right? The you get the title slide right now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, cool. All right. All right, great. Again, Josh Hurley, I've already introduced myself here, so let's get going. So the agenda for tonight, what I have here, we're going to do an overview of .NET on AWS, talk about hosting options, migrating to .NET, look at some of the new services and features related to .NET 5, talk about the tools for .NET developers, and then end with a Visual Studio demo. Actually, I'm going to switch one thing up. Some of the feedback I got was that because it's slide heavy on this presentation, I've inserted the Visual Studio demo in the middle of it to try to break up the slides. Because if you're like me, it's like after like 30 slides, it's like, okay, let's see something in action. So I'm going to actually do one little switch on that. But otherwise, it's going to be that content. So the most important message I have, I hope for the takeaway, is that AW loves .NET. We've been working really hard, our teams, to support .NET, in particular, support .NET 5 in the latest release, as well as going back and finding tools for customers that have legacy applications that need to support those legacy applications, but also have a desire to move to the cloud. So if at the end of the presentation, you're still not a believer, let me know, and I will help you out and say, these are the things, what else, or I should say, I'd love to know what else we can do to actually live up to this message. All right, this is a bit of an eye chart here, but what we tried to do is squeeze in over the last 12 plus years, our support of .NET and services related to .NET. So from an EC2 stance, we have over 100, or rather 275 instance types and 33 instance families that you can actually host .NET applications on. We have 200 different AMIs for Windows workloads and 22 different Linux AMIs for .NET Core / .NET 5 or SQL Server pre-configured. And if you're just looking at this list here, you know, the earliest thing that we offered, the first thing we offered was the .NET SDK. But as we expanded out here, we started offering various flavors of Windows, SQL Server. Then we started getting to app modernization. And then finally, and this is what I spent yesterday trying to update the slide with .NET 5 related, and I basically ran out of room here, but we have our toolkit that supports it, CodeBuild, Beanstalk, Lambda support with our container images and so forth, as well as the new tools that we've introduced, such as app to container and porting assistant. And we'll be covering those in a little bit here. But there is actually more, and I had to take some off just to squeeze the new stuff on. So we not only have been adding a lot, but we've actually accelerated how much we're adding. Because what we're seeing is that customers, particularly enterprise customers, need .NET support to be able to migrate over to the cloud. So we're there with our variety of tools and services to help support that. So there's a couple different ways to look at it, because the previous eye chart there is a little bit overwhelming, and I appreciate that feedback with almost 200 services where yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at how to deploy a solution to AWS. What I like to look at, at least from my developer background and DevOps background, is to say, you know, where's this thing living? What's it running on? And if we take a look at that and look at these services here, and from what I gathered, most of us are familiar with these services, so I won't go into great detail on what each of these are. But the first block here, I have categorized underneath .NET Framework. So it's our EC2, Elastic Beanstalk, Lightsail, ECS, and EKS services here. Now I have that as one block because those all support Windows instances. So that means that we can support .NET Framework. So .NET Framework being the legacy version of .NET. If you have more flexibility, or you're targeting a more modern version of .NET, such as .NET Core, .NET 5, and you can target this guy here, then we can, for Linux, then we can actually expand this list out to include AWS Fargate and Lambda. So, and Lambda being our serverless option, Fargate our serverless container option. Anybody not familiar with any of these services? Because I usually spend a little bit more time on this, but given the audience, I wanted to make sure that I didn't want to repeat things that you already knew. Okay. Another way of looking at it besides what they run on is I've got an existing set of workloads in my company. I want to bring it over to AWS. What option should I choose? So this workflow here is a typical conversation I'll have with a customer. So the first conversation usually is around, okay, I've got these existing workloads. I'm familiar with virtual machines. We have them in our environment. We want to bring those over to the cloud. So it's basically what we call a rehost or a lift and shift kind of conversation. So the question I ask first is, are we targeting virtual machines or containers? If we're targeting virtual machines, that to me, my mind means it's a rehost conversation. And then the next question I ask is, do you want AWS to manage that? Or do you want it to be self-managed? Self-managed meaning that you want to spin up these EC2 instances. So it's virtual machines on-prem. You want to have virtual machines in the cloud. That one-to-one mapping makes a lot of sense for organizations. If you come back and say, you know what, our application has a lot of overhead from management side, and one of the benefits of going to the cloud is to eliminate some of that overhead, then Elastic Beanstalk managing your EC2 instances is a more appropriate choice or something that should be explored. And if you're not familiar with Beanstalk, it allows you, for free of cost, allows you to manage the scaling and deploying of EC2 instances. Now, the EC2 instances that it spins up, it manages, you still have to pay for, obviously, but the service itself is free. So it's a value add. If going back up to this conversation, we talk about instead of a virtual machine, you're going to be targeting containers. To me, that's more of a re-platform conversation. You're going from virtual machine to containers, but essentially the application is going to be left intact for the most part, or minor changes for configuration, that kind of thing. So the next set of questions I have is it a .NET framework or a .NET Core / .NET 5 application? So it's a .NET framework, that means it's going to be Windows. And then the last question I have is, do you want, if it's going to be containers, do you want that to be orchestrated by Kubernetes or not? If you're not a Kubernetes shop and don't have an interest in using Kubernetes, then the service we recommend is Amazon ECS, Elastic Container Service, hosting Windows containers. Again, you have that familiarity of having Windows containers. If that's what most of your admins are experienced with, it helps with the transition from on-prem to cloud. If you have Kubernetes experience or want to deploy to Kubernetes or excited by it, then we have our EKS offering, Elastic Kubernetes Service, again, on Windows containers for that familiarity, and with .NET Framework is required. If you said it's a .NET Core or .NET 5 application, the next question I have is it Linux or Windows that you want to host it on? If it's back to Windows, then it's the same conversation that we just talked about down below here. What's the orchestration? And it's ECS or EKS. But if you have Linux, you have more options at that point. In this conversation, I said, well, this becomes more of a modernization conversation. I said, do you want to target serverless functions? And our solution for that would be Lambda. And at that point, it's a refactor conversation because you're taking code and you're going to have to refactor it significantly, for most, especially if it's a monolithic application, to be compatible and work properly with Lambda. Now you notice I cheated a little bit here. I expanded out the green zone here for re-platform, because if you come down here and if the conversation is, do you want to support serverless containers? And the answer is no. Whoops, you get back to that re-platform conversation. And again, it's, do you want Kubernetes or not? If you want Kubernetes, it's Amazon EKS, but in this case, it's Linux containers. If not, you go ECS with Linux containers. But if you are looking for serverless containers, then the next question is, and this is a Fargate discussion, do you want it to be orchestrated by Kubernetes? If so, then we use AWS Fargate with EKS managed Linux containers. So AWS Fargate, if you're not familiar, is our serverless container option that takes care of a lot of that maintenance that you would have to normally do to manage the fleet behind your Kubernetes or ECS offering.
Josh, do you want questions along the way, or
yeah, please.
All right. Curious from your perspective, when you pitch this to maybe enterprises, where do you find most people decide they want to go? Do they go with the rehost, replatform, or refactor, or is it completely dependent on the company?
No, it's a good question in your insight, and you're going right to where most companies go to. It's frankly scary for a lot of organizations that aren't familiar with cloud, or the group that's going to migrate, because there might be other parts of the pockets of the company that migrated, but that group hasn't. So typically the rehost side is the easier side to get onto the cloud. So, in my world, it's like, oh, go full blast, refactor and, completely leverage, cloud native technologies, with serverless or serverless containers and all that. But, that's a big pitch, and then when I used to be full-time software development, it was always a hard sell to say, hey, in 18 months, after we spend all this effort, millions of dollars and a lot of manpower to get to this point, we're going to have this beautiful new application that's completely refactored, and refactored almost becomes a dirty word in that context, because it's like, wow, that's a big commit and a big risk. So rehost is actually the preferred or the normal path that most companies come on. So they'll get that one-to-one translation from virtual machine over to cloud. And then once you're in the cloud, then you can go to replatform or jump up to refactor. My advice, though, is if you're building something brand new, obviously don't repeat the same thing in the cloud. Take advantage of it. If I'm building a brand new application, complete greenfield, then that's a great opportunity then to actually explore whether Lambda is the right solution or not. And sometimes it's not, but a lot of cases you'll get more value out of doing Lambda.
So when someone does make the jump to refactor, how often do they consider going off of .NET completely, right? If you're going to make the dive into the deep end, do people often step back and take a look at maybe their runtime and see if there might be something better at that point? Or are people having success and happiness in the net space with Lambda?
Yeah. I find both scenarios, but you're hitting it right on the head. If they're completely redoing their application, nothing should be off the table, right? It's, does .NET still make sense? If you have a legacy .NET framework application and you're going to rewrite it in .NET Core, .NET 5, it's a significant change between the two, right? Two different code bases. So it's already a big change. So you have to do that. So I've found companies where they said, Python makes more sense for us. Or Node is the future. Everything has to be JavaScript, server side, client side. That all makes sense. In some crazy way. So they go down that path. But it's also the other types of customers where like, hey, we have a strong base. We took a lot of effort to build up this talent experience base around .NET, C#. We know it really well. We would like to at least have something that translates over where we're taking on so much change. Let's keep something that our team knows well so that we can be more productive. So I find in both scenarios.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight.
Sure.
And Josh, just on the serverless for a second, we certainly hear that, the traditional languages like Java, like .NET, you have that cold start penalty. You want to comment on that versus some of the lighter weight stuff in the serverless environment?
Yeah, sure. So you definitely with both Java and .NET have more of a cold start. The runtimes are larger, so you have to spin that up. Once it's spun up, though, it's very performant. So it's that's one of those the mixed bag. So on a sustained rate, you're going to get a better performance out of .NET or Java. But that initial hit that you take when you spin up that instance, absolutely, you'll have more of that. Now, one of the great things with with .NET, they keep working on reducing that runtime, the size of the runtime that has to be loaded up, so that it actually does spin up faster. And container images is actually starting to get better as well with Lambda, so that you ramp up time or cold start time is less of a difference with container images between like scripted language and compiled language. But yeah, it traditionally has been an issue.
And are there numbers out there, Josh, for the size of the .NET Core versus the framework? How much?
I can get that to you. I think at .NET Conf they had they gave out a breakdown, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember the standout numbers were 7 million .NET developers worldwide, and something like 5 million of them use Visual Studio. And I'm trying to remember. I want to say, but I don't quote me on this. I know it's recorded, but I want to say.
Oh, so actually, sorry, Josh, I was asking a different question. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was talking the size. You know, you were talking about the runtimes constantly reducing. So I was wondering if we know the size of the core runtime versus the framework runtime size-wise.
Oh, yeah, I can get that for you. It's significantly less the size of core versus framework. It's less bulky, absolutely. And if you look at the you know, how it's broken out, like NuGet libraries, it's much more split up so that it actually helps reduce the size of the actual core runtime. But I can get that for you.
All right, thanks, Josh.
Yep. Cool. All right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that a big part of what I did last half of last year was working with a bunch of service teams here. And I'm not going to go through each icon here, although you might recognize some of them if you've used AWS. This is just a sampling of the service teams. I couldn't actually write down all of the names, so I just went with icons that are .NET 5 ready on AWS. You know, what's really interesting is that, you know, a number of them, you know, they support a variety of languages, but it's a, you know, the effort that we had to get most of these ready. I think it was something like over 80% of the services that are most used by our .NET customers were ready within 30 days of .NET 5 launching. So it launched 11.11. I want to say actually by 12.1, so it was less than that. It was like about a little over 3 weeks. More than 80% of these were ready for .NET 5, which was amazing to see these teams that normally work independently for releasing features because they want to get to market and support customers more quickly, able to coordinate with that. And I just wanted to highlight a few here for .NET 5. We're just talking about Lambda here. What's interesting with our Lambda offerings, we actually have two approaches for .NET 5. We have our new feature, container images, which went live in GA, was it the 2nd of December there. And we had support the next day for that available. And how we're supporting it is that the SDK team has what's called a base image container that they manage and patch that gets spun up that has .NET 5 on it. So they're managing that base container image for it. The other option, which has been around for a while, is called custom runtimes. Custom runtimes allows you to bring any OS that runs on Linux and run that on Lambda. Now you're responsible for keeping that patched and up to date. So that runtime is customer's responsibility. But containers, we do have a managed container image. Got links. You'll see I'll have links down at the bottom of all these slides here. One of the pieces of feedback I got before was that we were getting stressed out having to copy paste and trying to get this. I have them all typed up so I can paste them into our chat window. So you'll have all the links. So don't worry about having to copy paste or type these out, these shortened URLs. But I do have links there to 2 different blogs that talk to these. One of the interesting things when we're looking at the cloud providers out there is that currently we're the only one that actually offers full GA support for serverless offering right now. The other major cloud providers either have like what they call early access or preview versions or what have you. So these are fully supported GA releases. For Elastic Beanstalk, same thing. We had support within, I think, 2.5 weeks of launch. And with them, it's full support. It's not like some of the other providers that have a preview or I forget what they call it, early access, depending on the cloud provider. But this is another, what what you have with Elastic Beanstalk is you pick your AMI that you want to spin up. It's a fully supported Elastic Beanstalk managed AMI that has .NET 5 on it for both Linux and Windows. Windows, it's 2016 and 2019 for support. And again, the link at the bottom is a link to a blog post that describes it in more detail. Now, this is the one that sort of scratched a lot of heads when I first updated this presentation in December from my colleagues. And they're like, Josh, you're going to bore people talking about processors and .NET, because intuitively you're like, why would developers or a lot of people care about the underlying processor? Well, when I started looking into, what are the major features that are related to .NET 5, what's a big, what are the big claims, or what are the features that they're releasing? One of the things I saw that put a lot of work into is ARM64 support. And then I started thinking, well, we have ARM64 support with Graviton processor, and we released Graviton 2. And what is the performance impact? And I worked with a colleague, Kirk Davis, and he dug in and did a great job of analyzing how .NET 5's optimizations perform with Graviton 2. And he actually, it was really interesting. He found that for the equivalent Intel 64 processor, it was faster and cheaper. So it basically translates into up to 64% performance price advantage over choosing the Intel version. And again, this is using the same exact code that you'd have in .NET Core. The only asterisk I put in there is that you can, even though .NET Core, .NET 5 is cross-platform, you can put in specific calls to Windows libraries within those. So if you do that, then you obviously can't run it on Linux, so you wouldn't be able to run it with Graviton 2. The other thing you'll note here is I call out Linux distributions here, Alpine, Debian, Ubuntu. The reason why I call those out is that you can, and I've done it myself, spin up .NET 5 on other distributions, but Microsoft will only support .NET 5 on those 3 Linux distributions. So if you're doing something for production and you're hoping or expecting support from Microsoft, you'll want to target those 3 if you're using Graviton. And it's as easy as if you've gone through the console. It sounds like many of you have been using AWS for a while. You'll see the ARM64 option when you're choosing your AMI. You select that, you'll get a filtered list of, or highlighted list of your, of the Graviton 2 instances. And also, if you're not aware, we're having a free trial for our T4G micro instances until the end of March. So you get one of those instances for free this month and then next month if you want to actually try it out. So it's actually pretty interesting and compelling to actually spin these up and see on a literally a different architecture, chip architecture, .NET Core actually running the same as it would on Intel.
It's like a President's Day sale, Josh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think most of you are working for companies, so you're probably not too excited about free, but there's a number of people that are like, I don't even want to spend $5 to play around with the technology, so they get more excited about the free tier. All right, switching gears a bit to the tools that we use as .NET developers. When we look at tools, there's a large ecosystem for .NET developers. And when we go out and say, okay, what should we invest in to help customers best use AWS with .NET? We came up with a couple, with these 6 observations here. We looked at, we knew that we need to have a rich IDE and editor support. Developers like myself don't like to leave the IDE. You want to accomplish as much as you can within your IDE of choice. You want to have that IntelliSense when you're writing code, that it suggests things that would make sense as you're coding along. Also, those getting started, those project templates are helpful. Obviously, you're not probably going to go from template to production, but at least you get the boilerplate stuff, so you don't have to mess around, dig around for 2 hours on Stack Overflow to find out how do I iterate through a S3 bucket? You know, you have some of that helper boilerplate code built in. You want a full-featured, easily consumable SDK, and we'll get into our SDK in a couple of minutes here. Easy debugging and testing, command line support. So when you do leave the IDE and you actually want to go to command line, or you're building out your CI/CD workflow, you want to have things that make sense from a command line, and then go to CI/CD integration. And then you want to have it cross-platform development. So, you know, if you have people that are using Linux or Mac OS, it's not just a Windows-only experience. Development tools here, I've broken them out into 5 categories here. First, we're talking about IDE integration. Can't talk about .NET without Visual Studio, most prominent, dominant IDE available for .NET development. And reason why we've probably put the most features right now into our toolkit for Visual Studio. We also have a IDE integration with our for Visual Studio Code. And that isn't just .NET focused. Actually, it ends up being more popular for Python developers and Node developers and so forth that use that toolkit. And we also support Rider. For Programmable SDK, we have our AWS SDK for .NET, our really first foray back in 2008 into supporting .NET. And we also have a really popular, I know at Liberty, this is really popular, our CDK Cloud Development Kit. When I was an SA before I became a developer advocate, I think I helped organize a couple calls with Richard Boyd, our DA for CDK. I know different groups at Liberty loved CDK, and it really is one of our most popular in-demand tools right now. Command line tools. We have our AWS tools for PowerShell. We have our .NET CLI extensions, AWS CLI, and then AWS SAM, which is serverless application model. Probably wins, at least in my book, the cutest icon with the squirrel. We've got our CI/CD integration with the AWS Toolkit for Azure DevOps. And we have our AWS Code Suite. Technically, it's not called Code Suite, but I think everyone informally calls it that. Basically, it's code pipeline, code deploy, code build, code commit. We'll show those in a minute. I just put a couple on here on this slide. And then finally, we introduced these 2 last year, which is App to Container and Porting Assistant for .NET. We'll get into what each of those does in just a few minutes. So again, as I said, most .NET developers are using Visual Studio. So you'll find it's a very rich set of developer experience here. We have, and I'll show it off in just a minute, our AWS Explorer tool, which allows you to look through a tree view for a variety of AWS services related to development. You can manage S3 buckets, create, edit, delete Amazon DynamoDB tables, launch, manage EC2 instance through RDP. We have blueprints in there, project templates for serverless functions and applications. We have our wizards for easy deploy. This is probably, at least my favorite part of it, is the right-click deploys for Elastic Beanstalk, ECS, Lambda, and CloudFormation. And then we have our code editing IntelliSense for JSON templates with CloudFormation. And I think I messed up. Yep, there we go. There's the animation. Jump 2 ahead. The Explorer, and I'll show that off in just a sec, is that tree view for all of our services. And then we have our, as I mentioned earlier, deploy wizards for deploying to Beanstalk, containers, and to Lambda. I'll be showing a couple of those in our demo. All right, let's jump over to the demo here. And I need to switch screens here. You guys are probably still seeing demo, right?
No, we see your VS Code. Oh, excuse me, your Visual Studio.
Oh, Visual Studio. Okay, perfect, cool.
Now we don't. You moved it. Now it's just the demo screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, you know what? There
we go.
All right, cool. Now you're probably though getting the resolution issue there. Okay, that I didn't take into account. I had actually shrunk this down so you could see it better, but then I realized that my other screen is still larger resolution. All right, is this good for you guys, or I can redo this so that it matches the resolution? Can you guys see that well enough?
That's okay for me.
Okay. All right.
I can see it okay, but it might be too small for
Everybody
people
else.
with normal
Okay.
screens.
We just redo that resolution. Just bear with me just for a sec. Apologize for
That's,
that.
that's Chris bragging about his screen size in case anybody missed
I was not bragging about my size, Tim. I'm just.
I noticed you dropped screen out of that, by the way. So that was nice.
I'm taking that out of the recording as well.
Yeah, I have to be on good behavior. I'm like, can't go there. Can't go. All right. Keep changes. Let's see. So, all right. Let's try that again. All right. Better?
Yeah, much
better. Okay, cool. All right, cool. All right. So so what I have here is our AWS Explorer here, and you can have various profiles here. The default I have set up here just for demo purposes, but if you had a variety of contexts that you were dealing with, you could choose the profile you wanted. And then you can also choose the region that you want to look at. I happen to be in Canada right now, and then you can just go down through and look at a variety of different services. So DynamoDB, I don't think I have anything too interesting in Canada for DynamoDB, but this is a table related to, looks like, to X-Ray. You can look at EC2 instances, both the OMNIs that you might have and existing instances that you have that are live, including the one I'm using right now. Let's see, we've got container services, RDS, S3, SQS, VPCs, CloudFormation, Elastic Beanstalk. Beanstalk and Lambda down below here are probably the ones you're going to use the most from a development standpoint. You know, as you're waiting for it to spin up, you'll be going here. If you're jumping around between different instances, like if you have microservice architecture, you might have a list of Lambdas that you might go around and iterate through. All right. And let's go and create a couple of these here. I'm going to create basically a hello world application, but I'm going to try two different approaches. I'll show you two different approaches. One that's going to deploy it to Elastic Beanstalk, and the other one's going to deploy it to Lambda. So I'm going to do Beanstalk first here. So I'm just going to choose our ASP.NET core web application. And put it in here. And then we know where it is. The solution name. Oops, I'm still on 2020, and it's February. All right. And there we go. That way we'll see it separate from the other ones I've done. And I am a big fan of .NET 5, if you can't tell already. So we're going to choose .NET 5. If you had a corporate standard, let's say the one disadvantage to .NET 5 right now is that it's a current release, not a long-term supported release. So some companies, I'm not sure if Liberty is one of them, might have a policy where they only use long-term supported releases. So 3.1 would be the current long-term supported release. Long-term supported release has 3 years. Current releases is 1 year plus 3 months after the next major release. But since it's a demo, I have the luxury of choosing the latest version. So I'm going to go for it. I'm also going to uncheck the HTTPS just to keep it simple and make sure ASP.NET Core Web App is selected. Hit create. Nothing I've done right now is AWS specific. And what I'm going to do here, just to separate this from the other one, so when we spin up both, you can tell which one's which. Just going to go in here and save you some time here. I'm going to watching me code HTML is probably the most boring activity you can imagine. So I'll go in here and say something that just shows us that we're in Elastic Beanstalk running .NET 5. Build it just to make sure everything works. Not that we did anything too exciting. And then here's what I was talking about before, the right-click deploy. I always give this warning to people, the right-click deploy, great development testing utility, but a great way to get fired if this is your go-to production strategy. So, and certainly your manager you won't be on the promotion path if that's your strategy. But get something up and running when you're either proof of concept or something, awesome utility. So with that warning, click on Publish to Elastic Beanstalk after I right-click on the project. I have one already in here, but I'm going to create a brand new one. Again, it's going to pull in what we saw over here from the Explorer, my profile, the region that I'm in. It's going to have a name, and then we're going to choose an environment. It's giving us suggestions here, -dev. And then we have to check availability of the name. So we check that because it has to be a unique URL instance. It happens, I chose one that was unique. If not, I could just go in there and type something different. Now here we have our choice of, they call it container type. And there's a long story I won't get into why they're calling it that. Basically, it's your AMI that you're going to choose. In here, we get our list of our targets. We can choose Linux, Amazon Linux 2. There's 3 different versions there that have .NET Core support. And then we have our Windows server ones. The only thing, and this is a request I have into the team, is you'll notice that we have server 2012 listed down here. 2012 images don't have .NET 5 on them. Your next question is, well, how would I know that? Well, first, we should probably be filtering, and it is a request I have to the team to fix that. But in the interim, and I will put this in the links when I share that at the end here. But what you can go to is, and I'll bring up my browser here. Elastic Beanstalk has a release notes page. And what I do is I go to the latest release notes. And if I wanted to see what's supported, if I was targeting Linux, I would just click on the Linux here list. And I'd see down here, .NET 5, what specific version of .NET 5 is being supported with Linux 2. If I was targeting Windows, I'd find the last release notes for Windows. And I'd go down here and basically find the list of Windows servers instances that have .NET 5. So here's the name of the platform, and then .NET 5. And then you'll notice once we get down to 2012, which makes sense, yeah, we're only supporting .NET Core 3 at that point. Again, I'll put that link in there. I'm hoping in the near future we get that updated. But for now, I'm going to choose, let's see, 2019. We have our instance type, key pair. There's a number of other options. I'm just going to keep it really simple and just spin up a single instance. But with Elastic Beanstalk, you can actually manage a lot more around if you want to do A/B testing, blue-green deployments, that kind of thing. You can do that as well with Beanstalk. But again, I'm just going to do a single instance just to demonstrate how to do this. Roles, you can choose a different set of roles depending on your type of access that you need to grant the application and how it's deployed. Again, this is really simple, hello world, so we're just going to go with the basic roles. And then finally, we can enable X-ray, enhanced health reporting. We can deploy it if you're familiar with .NET as either debug or release. And if you're in like more of a testing mode, trying to debug, want to debug things, you'll probably want to leave it in debug. But obviously, for production's sake, you'd want to have something in release mode. And then it summarizes, and then we hit deploy. Now this is like sort of like the cooking segment. Instead of, since I can't fast forward this right now, what I'm going to do is jump onto the Lambda instance while this is deploying and launching, and then come back to this when it's done. I'm going to go back up to my solution here, right click, and create new solution. Where did I miss that? Not new solution, new project, sorry. I'm missing that. File, new project, there it is. And on this side, what I'm going to do is Lambda. So I'm going to go in this drop-down list here. I'm going to filter by AWS. So I just get the AWS related project templates. And I'm going to say AWS project template, C#, hit next. And give it a name that we'll recognize here, AWS Lambda 2021. Create that. Now this is a little different from the Elastic Beanstalk. We're asked what blueprint do you want to use? And these blueprints here have basically getting started code for you. So make life a little bit easier. So you get the hooks in that you need for Lambda. I'm going to choose custom runtime because I want to go .NET. Now, the reason I can't choose container image is that I'm on a virtual machine right now, and you can't do nested virtual machines on EC2 unless you do I think there's only a couple of them where you have to do the metal instances. Didn't want to go through that whole effort with you guys. That would be pretty kind of boring. But if you were at typical development scenario, you probably wouldn't be using a virtual machine to develop. You'd be using your laptop. So you would you can choose that. So the requirement there, if you which I skipped over, is Docker. So if you're going to use containers, you need to have Docker running on your machine. So I'm going to use custom runtime.
Josh, real quick, does this pull from the serverless application repository, or where are these pre-configured images being populated from?
I believe, let me take a note. I think that is pulled down from NuGet. When I was talking to the developer, I think he said because they can update them independently. But let me get that because I'm not 100% on that. So where are these pulled from? Projects, blueprints pulled from.
You would think yes, right, Josh?
I think it's NuGet. I think at one point it was prepackaged with the toolkit, which, as you can imagine, was problematic because you'd have to wait. You'd have to do a whole deploy, redeploy just to get a blueprint updated. But it's one of those things that it's like, is this something that they're working on or already resolved? So I'm going to talk to the developer that I know that's on the team and get that answer for you. But I believe it's NuGet.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. All right, so I'm going to choose custom runtime function, hit finish. Okay. Now this is going to look pretty similar to a regular .NET project. I instinctively, like probably a lot of you, will hit show all files. Don't necessarily need to do that, but I hate things being hidden from me, so yeah, I'll do that. You'll notice the a README file, which actually this README is very helpful. The SDK team who actually created a lot of this functionality here goes into great detail if you want to know how all of this works. It's implemented. And what I'm going to do down here, just so we can differentiate this from the Elastic Beanstalk, so I'm just going to put a little bit of code in here. Let's see, I've got some here. That doesn't do anything much more fancy than basically takes your code that you input in and returns it all in caps. But I at least say it's running from Lambda custom runtime and yelling back in caps. And I'm going to build that, make sure I went wrong. All right. And again, right-click deploy on this. This time you'll see it's published to Lambda, AWS Lambda opposed to Beanstalk. You'll see that little pop-up message that was from Beanstalk, meaning that the deployment was complete. We'll take a look at that in just a sec. So we get our upload to Lambda function. And what this is going to do is it's going to zip this up, this custom runtime. And what's different about custom runtime than the managed runtimes that are available in Lambda is that this, again, is supporting a larger set of frameworks, applications, application frameworks, rather. And right now, this is narrowed down to .NET 5. So we only have .NET 5 as the supported managed custom runtime through this utility. You can, though, have a larger set if there's Tim's great framework that he created, he basically ported .NET, decided to create his own version, you could package it up yourself. It wouldn't be available through the wizard though. So I'm going to put in a function name here, yelling in Lambda 2021. And the roles, I'm just going to choose a basic role. Again, we're not doing anything too exciting. If your Lambda function was calling things that needed more permissions, S3 or so forth, you probably have to choose a role that had greater permissions. I'm going to go with all the other defaults because we're not doing anything else but spitting back some text. But if it was more intense, you might want to have larger memory. There's some other VPC scenarios with databases and such you might want to explore. Otherwise, we're going to keep it simple. And then we hit upload. And while that's running, go back to our other project. And did I close that out? Yeah. And when I did project new, yeah, I did. Okay. Yeah, I closed out the other project there. So I'm going to hit close there. So let that run. As I mentioned earlier, I can go to the Explorer here. We'll hit refresh, and that should be, yep. Oops. Hold on just a sec. Actually, that finished a lot faster than I thought. All right, well, let's go to Beanstalk here. And that is the one I believe I had. Yep, 210, yep. This is the one we just did. So basically what this screen is showing us here are all the various steps from creating to all the way through deploying. And then ultimately you've got your URL for where it's deployed to Elastic Beanstalk. You can click on that. And you can tell my great UI skills here drops down 5 to the next line, which actually we could change. I could show you how to change that to 1 line. But effectively, this is running in Elastic Beanstalk for us. And let's go to the other screen there that you saw pop up. So that yelling in Lambda 2021, that Lambda example that we had. So we said, hello from AWS Pug. And the slowest first start, where we're talking about cold start there. So you get that first initial hit there where it's a little bit more sluggish, but then after it's in, we can add other text and run it again, which will be faster on every iteration thereafter. So now that's running in our Lambda instance, .NET 5. So we've got 2 different approaches to ultimately host your .NET related code. One was Lambda related, one was Elastic Beanstalk related. What I didn't show were the ones that were related to containers, because again, I'm on demoing on a virtual machine, so I can't do nested containers, at least with Windows. So I didn't show the right-click deploy for containers, which is available to you, or the .NET 5 option, which is to deploy to using the container images functionality, but it's a very similar experience. I will have a link that describes that from somebody that worked on it, blog post that describes it in great detail. The wizards are going to be very similar to what you saw before. Any questions on that before I get back to the slide deck? All right, everyone see the slides? Cool, all right. And if I get to, all right, cool. I still can't figure out, there's something that keeps popping up that says standard on my monitor. I don't know where it's coming from. It's been, since I swapped out my monitors, it's always started appearing in the upper left-hand corner every once in a while. It's the oddest thing. So if you see the word standard, that's, it's not just you, or not your machine, it's mine.
I didn't catch it. I didn't see it.
Yeah, it pops up infrequently, but it just is red text. It says standard up in the left-hand corner. It's odd.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, so we looked at our Visual Studio Toolkit. We also support Visual Studio Code. And it's not just for .NET. We also support Node and Python, and I believe probably more development happens with that with Node and Python. It's amazing, when you have a free tool from Microsoft, how popular it becomes. So it's been very, very well embraced by the open source community. So that's not too surprising. So, but as a .NET developer, now the key thing to keep in mind is that it's a much newer tool, this and the Rider toolkit. So the focus initially is on serverless deployments, but they are expanding features. So when you, if you go in, which I do, go between the toolkit for Visual Studio versus VS Code or Rider, you'll see there's definitely a disparity between features. And it's just one has almost 10 years of development and one has about 1.5 years of development, or the last two have 1.5 years of development. So that explains it. But with everything, we love to get feedback. If there's something you said, it would be a killer experience if it had this, let me know. I literally speak with the teams probably every other day that work on these. So I can forward, and they eagerly want customer feedback. They get sick of hearing just from me. They don't like, well, okay, Josh, we know what you like and what you don't, but can we have customers actually talk to us about it? So let me know, please. But for Visual Studio Code, we have those getting started templates, again, focused on serverless, step through debugging. And then you also have the deployments from the IDE. I have links there, not only to the toolkit, but also GitHub. You can see the source code. Actually, if you so inclined, actually put a pull request in for features. Rider, again, similar kind of experience where it's focused on serverless. You get your quick start serverless templates, step to debugging, deploy from IDE. Also have the Access CloudWatch from the IDE. Again, links to the toolkit as well as the GitHub location for source and contributions, and submit issues there. For Programmable SDK, basically the heart of our .NET offering is the SDK for .NET. So central home for all SDK and extension libraries is located on GitHub. You can see the development in process there. We do take contributions. I actually contributed something last fall to it. So if you touch S3 through the .NET SDK, you'll have touched a little bit of my code. But don't worry, it was evaluated by much better programmers than me. So I got the stamp of approval from them. But no, they do take contributions from community, which is great. Does provide programmer access to all AWS services. It's updated almost every day. And it's a nice consistent programming model, which I'll show off in just a sec. There's a subset of libraries that they offer called, they nickname them called higher level libraries. And these are basically abstractions on top of where, these lower level libraries, we cover all the services, but there's a particular set that say, okay, this is popular. S3, obviously very popular. Queues, other things that are popular with developers, they put more effort into that to make those programming tasks more simple for you. We have cross-platform support for .NET, includes .NET Framework, .NET Core, .NET 5, Xamarin, it's open source. Again, distributed through NuGet, so nothing behind our firewall or anything. It's all out in the open. And if you look at it as a holistic model here, again, at the core of it, AWS SDK .NET, we have what I was talking about earlier, these low-level service APIs, as well as higher-level utility APIs like our S3 transfer utility or DynamoDB object persistence library. Our tools for PowerShell, as well as the toolkit for Visual Studio, are built on top of the SDK. Things we also port out to or are built using it, ASP.NET Session Manager, Trace Listener. And we support .NET 3.5 and higher through .NET 4.5 and higher, .NET Core, .NET 5, and Xamarin. Our NuGet packages target .NET Standard 2.0. If you're familiar with .NET Standard, we were supporting up until the end of last year 1.3, but that was associated with .NET Core, which hasn't been supported by Microsoft in at least 1.5 years, 2 years now. So basically, we've deprecated that because Microsoft's not supporting it. It didn't really make sense that we continue to put the effort in, and we found customers weren't really targeting unsupported versions of .NET Core anymore. So we have .NET Core Standard, and that's important too. If you do any Xamarin work, you do have to specifically target .NET Standard 2.0. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we even though we're covering all of the service offerings, and the APIs are different between services, what's nice about the SDK is it gives you a consistent access to those. And once you start using it, you'll find that there's that consistency translates. So the service names, we use the same pattern for service names in the models for the service names. The client will follow the same kind of naming convention, the operation names, and so forth. So quickly you'll get that familiarity to say, okay, even though I'm jumping between DynamoDB or SQSQ or what have you, it's like, okay, you can take a pretty good guess, and IntelliSense helps you out with the rest. So it's a better kind of experience. So it's you can quickly adapt for service X that gets announced next reInvent. You're like, okay, you don't have to sweat as much. Here's a example of iterating through an S3 bucket. So what we do is again consistent naming patterns here with Amazon S3 and model. We go instantiate a new S3 client, calling the US West 2 instance. We call the list object async method. We end up iterating through the bucket through this, and then ultimately this is a simple example. We were writing out the key and last modified string, and then we do our do while doing that. So if you're familiar with .NET, C# specifically, this should be pretty familiar. There's not like the Amazon way or AWS way of coding. It should be pretty similar to most coding standards that you would normally use. And the product team there for .NET SDK really wanted me to emphasize this. So they want customer feedback. So they even set this is I think it's 2 days old, this email address. So they want you to reach out to them. If you're using the .NET SDK, good or bad, they want to hear from you. They want to talk to customers that are using it, want to hear what features what they share with me, what's upcoming with feature sets, pretty exciting. But they still want to get that customer feedback to see what other things they should work on, what should be fixed if you find issues, that kind of thing. And then the more traditional route too, if I go through GitHub, you can file issues through that, feature requests through GitHub issues. All right, command line tools. If you're familiar with PowerShell, we have your back. We've got 4,300 commandlets, and this slide is probably 4 months old, so I'm guessing it's more than that now, but at least 7,300 commandlets across our 200 plus services. We have a couple different flavors of PowerShell because our offering has been around for quite a while. The recommended approach is to use the distributed model, the AWS Tools asterisk. So instead of downloading a big monolithic download what you need for modules per service, opposed to the other offerings. Those other ones are still available, but they're more considered legacy now. And the big thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, that tools for PowerShell are built on top of the SDK. So anything you can do with the SDK, you can also script it in PowerShell. We have .NET CLI extensions, again, support cross-platform. There's things that, basically the things I was showing you in Visual Studio, you can do at the command line with .NET. The install down below here, the .NET tool installed /g tool name is how you would install it. Again, nothing special. We're not an AWS specific thing. We're using the same conventions that you would normally use to install .NET tools. Also up here, we just make the mention on the slide here is that you can go back and forth. So you want to go back to the IDE, it's using the same deployment setting files. So you can go between CLI and IDE. And for project templates here, I've got the command down below, how you would install all the project templates for Lambda. If you're looking at this list, that will look a bit familiar for when we went through the wizards, that same project templates list here, but this is how you would install it at the command line level. If you want to list them out, again, it's just using the same .NET normal CLI commands, .NET new /list, and you'll see all the Lambda related because AWS appears first. If you want to install the Amazon Lambda tools there, again, if you this is great if you're a command line guy, or you're thinking about CI/CD options where you want to automate the stuff, you want to have the command line available. So this is how you would install that. We have the tools for ECS as well with those commands, and Beanstalk. Now switching gears a little bit to CI/CD. And one of the things that we recognize is that there's a strong devotion to Azure DevOps. And if you have a similar path as me, I was a TFS guy when I was a full-time developer before the cloud, and then became a VSTS, the Visual Studio Team Services, and became Azure DevOps. So I definitely bought into that whole ecosystem and understand it well and understand why people love it. And AWS, we don't want you to dump all that and have to adopt all our tools. So what we offer is the AWS Toolkit for Azure DevOps. So it's basically that you can keep everything still in Azure DevOps, but it's that last mile, that last step, which is deploying it to AWS. We give you all the hooks that you need to be able to do that and list out the more common tasks right there. But if you did want to know about our tools, here's our list. Here's a little chart. Orchestrating everything is AWS CodePipeline. Now, I'm listing out just the AWS services here, but CodePipeline is flexible. If there's a tool service that you'd like to use that's not an AWS, you can call that, or most likely have a hook to call that from CodePipeline. For instance, AWS CodeCommit, which is our Git compatible source repository. If you like GitHub, happy with it, keep with GitHub, call that from CodePipeline instead of using CodeCommit. Still works. Same thing with CodeBuild, which is our managed build service. If you like Jenkins for some crazy reason and you want to keep on Jenkins, go for it. There's plenty of customers that have that. And actually, I think our .NET SDK team still, I think up to last year, was using Jenkins. So it was a very common scenario, let's put it that way, that Jenkins was still being used as a build server. But we do offer a build service. Code deploy, though, my recommendation is usually if you're going to go CodePipeline, the last bit, the deploy to our services, it really just makes sense to use code deploy. I think there are other ways to get around code deploy, but at that point, to me, it wouldn't make sense to actually set up a code pipeline, but I believe it's possible. But that would be the only one out of the group that you would probably want to use if you're using CodePipeline. And there's no charge for it, so it's not like not like we're making extra money off. Ooh, they're using CodePipeline, yay! But CodePipeline will get you out, deploy out to EC2, Lambda, and our container services. As I mentioned earlier, CDK, and I know we have a number of Liberty people there. I know very popular at Liberty, and just popular in general with our customers. We have our CDK. Now I'm mentioning you can define code, infrastructure, and applications using C#. Obviously, you can use it in other languages too, TypeScript, JavaScript, and Python, but I'm a C# guy, so that's why I highlight C#. The real benefit to me is that, there are some people that love to work in CloudFormation templates. For whatever reason, they love looking at hundreds or thousands of lines of code to build out infrastructure, and they're like, yay! I'm not one of them, so I'd rather do something more higher level, take that abstraction. Instead of writing out 100 lines, write out 10 lines, makes more sense, at least in my world. So that's where CDK fits in, at least for me, where down below here, I give the analogy of the CDK is sort of like your compiler. Ultimately, what it produces is a CloudFormation template that then you can run in our AWS CloudFormation to actually deploy your CloudFormation template. A couple examples here, and this will look like pretty straightforward C# to you, but this is actually CDK that's going to help you. This first example here is our queue service. It creates a new queue called My First Queue with a timeout of 300. Then we create a new SNS topic called My First Topic with a display name, My First Topic. All of this here, I'm trying to think of what the equivalent CloudFormation template. I want to say at least triple that to do that in CloudFormation. And then down below, an example of creating 5 S3 buckets, creating a user, and then granting that user read permissions to those new buckets that you created. So very straightforward. Again, if you already have very comfortable with C#, then it would make more sense if you're creating your infrastructure as code than writing the CloudFormation YAML or JSON. All right, switching to migration modernization. 2 tools I'm going to mention, again, just came out last year. And they're trying to solve a similar problem. The first one is app to container. So app to container, we're looking at legacy applications and we're saying, all right, customers want to get it to the cloud. One of the biggest hurdles is saying, okay, we've got these old .NET framework applications. We can't invest the money that we want to modernize those to .NET Core, but we need to get those to the cloud. So it's sort of the roadblock there. And what we came up with was this app to container where we containerize the application, your older legacy application, and then you deploy your container out. The intermediate stop is Amazon ECR, our registry for your container. And then from there, you would deploy it out to ECS or EKS, depending on if you want to use Kubernetes or not. They're on, let's see, 1.3 right now of the release. And again, another team that's actively looking for customer feedback on what other functionality you'd like to see within that. And it is a free tool and open source. The other tool we have is a porting assistant for .NET. This will analyze again, it's targeted for legacy applications. So if you have a legacy .NET framework application, it's going to analyze it and give you a compatibility assessment report that tells you what is needed to get it to .NET Core. Likely, you're either going to target 3.1 if you have a policy to support only LTS, or .NET 5. And it will give you that list of what issues are known for that. And then the nice thing is that it'll actually give you recommendations for known replacements for things that are incompatible between .NET Framework and .NET Core, .NET 5. Doesn't do the actual conversion for you, but it does a lot of that grunt work. So it saves you a good deal of time. All right, so whole bunch of links here. Again, I'm going to paste them into our chat here so you can have them. But they cover everything from our homepage to white papers to Julie Lerman, who's out in Vermont, who did some Pluralsight courses and blog posts about .NET on AWS, as well as our YouTube playlist. And this is this we've been working on, put a lot of effort in the last couple of months to make sure that anything that's newsworthy around .NET on AWS, we capture it on Twitter. So if you want to, if you're interested in .NET on AWS, this is the best place to get that information. So, follow that. I'm actively involved in that. So almost at least one of the tweets a day is usually from me. So, you'll know that it's somebody that it's not marketing. So if any, and ping me if you think I'm speaking Marketingese, if that's the right word. If I sound too marketing oriented, let me know. But I'm trying to figure out what's compelling, and it seems to be doing well. Getting a lot of positive feedback on just content because it's sort of scattered right now based on services and everything else, and we just wanted that central spot where we can just say, hey, something new on .NET on AWS. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And questions?
I just have a curiosity question. Is it a hard sell to lure people away from Azure, or are they lured by the endless AWS offerings and they just want to get in there and have access to all the AWS goodness.